So the market failure of positive externalities is what we are next doing. Let's first look at positive production externalities. It is externality created by production which is positive. So it's a positive spillover benefit created by producers. The production of a good and service is creating benefits that help a third party who is not directly involved in the market transaction, like the society. So in the case of positive production externalities, it's pretty rare because we're looking at producers who are basically creating social benefits, where we know that producers, firms, they are basically driven by a profit incentive. So this is a pretty rare kind of externality, but it does happen. A good example is malaria research, or research for the COVID vaccine, or AIDS research. Now these firms that are spending a lot of money, they have very high private costs because they have to, the cost of research and development is really, really high. But the society is going to benefit, and not as a whole, and not just the firm, which means that there are social benefits to this, right? And but the social costs actually are pretty low. The private costs are very high. So this type of externality, we want to show that the social costs may not be as high as the private costs. The private costs are really high, and the social benefit is much more than the social cost. So this is one example. Another example we can give is the training provided by firms to employees, because if that employee moves on to another firm, the other firms and the society as a whole are getting the benefit of a trained employee, but it is the first firm that actually paid for training the employee. So this is again a good example of positive production externality. Other than these examples, there are not really very many examples of how production can lead to a positive spillover benefit, but these are really good examples for this. Now the next thing is the diagram. So how do we diagram it? We are going to show price curves, cost curves, and benefit curves, which is why I've written that on the y-axis. Any curve that you're going to show, anything that you're going to show like price or cost or the benefits, you want to write it at the y-axis. On the x-axis, we are taking the quantity. Now, what's a simple way to draw a positive production externality diagram? We look for clues right over here, which is why I've circled them. So we know that we're looking at production externality, which is positive. So the moment we see production, we know that there are going to be two upward sloping curves, because the supply curve is looking at production, and we want to show an externality, which means we're going to split the supply curve, right? So that's our first step, is splitting up the supply curve. So we can draw two supply curves. Okay, and we know there's only one supply curve in a diagram. Now we have to figure out which one. The supply curve is the cost curve, so obviously we're going to call these as cost curves, but which one should be the private cost and which one should be the social cost? Now we're saying that the private cost is very high in this case, because we're looking at research for malaria or research for a COVID vaccine. So we're saying that there's going to be very high private costs. So we just want to show the private costs higher than the social costs, right? And we know the private cost is actually our market curve. So that's our supply curve. We don't want to show any externality for the consumption side, so we can just draw a simple downward sloping demand curve and call that showing both the benefits, the private as well as the social benefit. There's no split up between them. But in the case of cost, the social cost is lower than the private cost. Wherever the supply and demand are intersecting, that's our market quantity. That's how much is being produced in the market and at this price. But the social cost and the social benefit intersection will actually give us the optimum quantity that should be there in the market and the optimum price. So which means that at the market quantity, if we look at the market quantity, first of all, we see that it is lesser than the optimum quantity. The market quantity is much lesser than optimum. And at the market quantity, marginal social benefit is greater than marginal social cost. Let's look at that. At the market quantity, marginal social benefit, that is this one, this is over here, right? So we can just maybe mark that. So that's marginal social benefit at market quantity, right? What about marginal social cost? Let's look at that. So this is marginal social cost, and we're looking at market quantity. Where's the marginal social cost? So it's over here. So we can mark that point. This is the marginal social cost at market quantity. So we can clearly see that the marginal social benefit is higher than the marginal social cost, which means that there is an external benefit to the society. So this distance is the external benefit. And if we have to show the welfare loss, we would just show this triangle as the welfare loss, because the point is at q-opt and the base is at qm. We can see that distance at qm. We can see the marginal social benefit is greater than the marginal social cost. Okay, so what are the solutions to this type of externality? How can we solve it? Now the idea is there is too less in the market. That's what we say, that the market quantity is too less and the optimum should be more. So the idea is to increase the supply of this. So one way, for example, for vaccines, it's very common for the government to directly provide it. So they would provide it to the market so that there's enough. And we can just draw the same diagram again. Just calling this price cost benefit for short. Again, the demand curve shows both the private as well as the social benefit, but the marginal private cost is much higher than the marginal social cost. So we want to show the market quantity is lesser than optimum. Okay, so the idea is that if the government will directly provide it, there will be an increase in supply, which is shown by the rightward shift of the supply curve. This is when the government is actually supplying the good directly, right? Another way is that the government can grant a subsidy. Now, a subsidy is a sum of money or a payment provided by the government to firms. So pharmaceutical companies, for instance, that are producing the vaccine, they can be given some amount of money by the government to fund that research and development, and the effect of that will actually be the same, because it will lower the cost of production for the vaccine, and the effect of lowering of cost of production is increase in the supply of the vaccine. So we can just draw that once again. It's repetitive, but it's basically the same diagram, because you're actually increasing the supply of it. So it will lead to a downward shift of the supply curve from MPC to MSC, because you want to get rid of this spillover benefit. So this is the spillover benefit, and here the per unit subsidy can be given, So that per unit subsidy will be equal to that external benefit, right? And then the market quantity will increase to Q opt. And the price actually decreases because there's more supply in the market. So that's all about the the positive production externalities. Now coming to positive consumption externalities, it is the external benefits enjoyed by society due to the consumption of a good. Okay, so the society is enjoying somebody else consuming the good. So a good example of this can be education and healthcare, because both of these create external benefits to society. For healthcare, for instance, you have a more productive population if there is a lot of people who are consuming healthcare, and a higher standard of living and a higher rate of economic growth. Education, it will lead to a productive workforce, lower unemployment, higher rate of growth, lower crime rate, and economic development. So why is this a market failure? Well, it's a market failure because the free market quantity QM will be less than the socially optimum quantity Q opt. That is why this is called a market failure. Just like positive production externalities, where QM was not enough in the market, there's too little of it. In the same way, it's going to be for consumption externalities positive. Again, to draw the diagram, we just look for those clues over here itself. So we know that it's a consumption externality, which means we're going to have two downward sloping curves. So we can just straight away draw them. Okay, and we know it's positive, which means that the social benefit is going to be higher than the private benefit, and there is no externality in the production side. So that is marginal private cost as well as social cost. Now if you look at the market quantity, which is the intersection of the demand and supply curve, we will see that the market quantity is quite less compared to the optimum quantity which should be there in the market. So at the point of production QM, we would see a difference between the marginal social benefit and the marginal social cost, right? The marginal social benefit will be greater, right? So let's look at that at QM. What we see is that the marginal social benefit is up here, right? Whereas the marginal social cost is over here at QM. So the marginal social benefit is greater than the marginal social cost. So that shows the welfare loss. It's actually a negative welfare loss. So we can just shade that over here. That's our negative welfare loss, and this is showing us the external benefit. Due to the consumption of the good, right? Our point of the triangle as usual comes at Q opt, and we can see that because this is a positive consumption externality, the point is going to be towards the right. So what are some solutions to a positive consumption externality? One is legislation or advertising. So governments can use put legislations and say that primary education is compulsory, or they can look for legislations on healthcare or positively advertise healthcare. So all of that the effect will be, if for instance we look at that example of making primary education compulsory, the effect will be that the demand for education will increase. So it is the same like for negative. So you just start off with the diagram for positive consumption externality, which is there is a difference between the two demand curves. So you have your two demand curves, and this one is showing the social benefit, which is higher than the private benefit, right? And your supply curve, which does not show any externality. So one method is to increase if this is D1, then this will be D2, because the demand curve will shift to the right due to the legislation of having primary education compulsory. And then this market quantity will improve to Q opt, and this will also happen. Okay, another solution is direct government provision, which will look the same, and granting a subsidy, actually both the diagrams are pretty much the same, just a little change in labeling. So I think I can just copy and paste it to make it quicker. So this is your MPP, this is MSP, and this is private cost and social cost. So what effect will there be of having direct government provision? We can also label all of this, which is, we know it is market quantity, market price, and this is the optimum and the optimum price. So I can just duplicate it. And then we'll see what will be the result of the solution. So in this case, we're looking at a direct government provision, so the increase of supply, and the supply should be such that the externality is eliminated. So to eliminate that externality, you can just mark this point, because this is the difference between that is your externality, really. So just having another supply here, maybe this is supply 1 and this is supply 2, which is supply 1 plus direct government provision. So having the supply increase of education, and the effect will also come on the market price, because the market price will come down, right, because the government is providing it. So more supply would always drive the price down. The quantity in the market will now come to Q opt. Another idea is granting a subsidy, so giving a subsidy to the private firms. The effect will be the same. The effect is of a subsidy will always be an increase of supply due to a decrease in the cost of production. So if this is S1, we can maybe call this as S2, which is S1 plus subsidy, per unit subsidy. And again, the subsidy will drive the price in the market down from PM1 to PM2 and increase the market quantity from QN to Q opt. So these are three solutions for correcting the positive consumption externality. Another solution can obviously be creating some kind of education and awareness, which will be just like advertising, and it will have the same impact as this diagram. And you can even have things like nudges. Now nudges are basically it's an indirect kind of push to the consumers to consume more of a good, which the government can do. It will have the same effect like education, awareness, etc. So for instance, if we can give an example of a good with positive consumption externalities is exercise, right? So that's one more example. So education is there, healthcare is there, but also something like exercise is another example. So if the government makes bicycle lanes for you to actually ride your bicycle, that is the government providing a nudge to increase physical fitness in the society in general. So again, that will solve this problem of positive consumption externality, and more people are going to exercise, and the quantity will move towards optimum.